So, before I begin, I just want one last round of applause for Mark. My God, what has this person done? His team and him, what has he done? And I want to thank you all for sticking around for this last little bit of fuckery. I'm so self-conscious because like I'm about to go on stage and give this no seriously fuck engagement, and there's like a 10-year-old girl like sitting right here, and I'm like, I'm just gonna pretend she doesn't speak English. It'll be cool. So anyway, my name is David Dylan Thomas, and my job is to go around and get people excited about and give them better tools for more inclusive design. Now, I wrote this book, Design for Cognitive Bias, available now on audiobook. And spoiler alert, that book ends with this quote from Martin Luther King. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, when machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Now, for the purposes of this talk, I want to focus on that first sentence. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. Now, he said this over 50 years ago, so the ship has sailed on the whole rapidly part of this, but the question I want to ask in this talk is, if we can agree it's a good idea to go from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, what is our role in that shift? As designers, as developers, as humans, what is our role in that shift from thing-oriented to people-oriented? Now, to go on that journey, we are going to have to talk about genocide. We are going to see an example of hate speech. But for starters, let's talk about how the mirror ruined everything. Not too long ago, if you wanted to know what you looked like, what your face looked like, you had to luck into a still body of water, like a pond, like our friend Narcissus here. I'm sure that'll go very well. Otherwise, you would go the whole day never knowing, do I have some schmutz on my face, right? You would literally never know what you looked like. You could go your whole life, never actually know what you look like. Now, around the time of the Renaissance, we start to get pretty good at making mirrors. And some things start to shift, especially around the idea of the self, which up until then was a fuzzy concept at best. So Morris Berman writes, we find a sharp simultaneous increase in self-awareness and in the quantity and technical quality of mirror reproduction. What does that look like? Well, you've got self-portraiture on the rise. Well, of course you do. If I can see what I look like, then I can paint myself. However, you also see an increase in first-person novels, which we already had the technology to do that. We had the word I, but funnily enough, we waited until mirrors to start really cranking that out. We also see a rise in books on etiquette, because it isn't just I can see what I look like to myself, I can see what I look like to other people. So all of a sudden, self-consciousness comes in. How do I behave? How do I act when I'm around other people? You know what else you see a rise in around the time of the mirror? Standing armies. Because it isn't just people who can see what they look like to other people. Nation states can start to see what they look like to other nation states. And maybe they look like a tasty treat. So maybe instead of having to raise an army every single time I want to go to war, maybe I'll just have one lying around all the time, maybe out by the border. Now that's what we get from just one mirror we look at maybe twice a day. But imagine if the entire world were nothing but mirrors. Online, that's basically what we have. I defy you to go to a website in your daily routine that is not personalized to you. The version of that website you see is not the version of the website your neighbor sees. It is made just for you. And you can be forgiven for believing that the entire world revolves around you, because online it actually does. Even if you're not logged in, here's me on the AP website. I just, I don't know, bought a terabyte drive the other day, and all of a sudden, that purchase decision is following me around the web. It was not ever thus. If we go far enough back, the web is just a really weird art gallery. People post all sorts of crazy shit. Homestar Runner, right? which to this day cannot be personalized. There is no logged in state for Homestar Runner. The Homestar Runner that I see is the Homestar Runner that you see. God bless them. Even if I want to talk to other people, I still got to look at my dumb face, right? And how is this like replicating the real world? If I have a real world meeting, I'm not holding a mirror right here the whole time. And this starts to impact how I perceive my personal space. How many of you have a guitar in your Zoom background, right? All right, how many of you actually play guitar? So we start to affect ourselves when the web affects us. We see ourselves as advertisers see us, as a product. See, it'd be bad enough if every single website was personalized with all my data, but it's not any old version of myself that's being reflected back. It's the version of myself that's interesting to advertisers, because that's how we paid for the personalization in the first place, right? What are my likes? What are my dislikes? What are the things that are going to make it easier to sell to me? The product version of me. And this manifests itself in how we portray ourselves online, right? This is me in Berlin before the last Beyond Tellerrand, right? Look at me, I'm in Berlin sipping a cappuccino, aren't I cool, right? So the same tools, the same filters that we use on Instagram to make ourselves look good are literally the same filters and tools that marketers use to make their products look good. And Facebook knows this is a bad idea. Their own research showed that when teen girls would go online and productize themselves and compare themselves to other teen girls who were productizing themselves, it plummeted their self-esteem. And the proof of this is in the term personal brand. How many of you remember where you were the first time you heard the word personal brand? Did you die a little inside? And mea culpa, I have a personal brand, right? But that word, brand, tells you what we're really talking about here. Now, why do I care so much about personalization? Well, it's because a lot of that personalization is in the interest of something we call engagement. Advertisers believe that if you are more personally involved in the website, right, if it's speaking to you more directly, you will be more engaged. But what do we even mean by that? What is engagement? I don't think any of us are talking about getting married. I don't think we're making plans to meet up later. But in a way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the meaning of engagement is. What matters is how we measure it. Likes, shares, ENPS, surveys. Because that is what's deciding if we get to keep our job. That is what's deciding if we get that raise or not, right? It's the metric. That's what we really care about here. Now, this might seem like a pretty fair exchange, right? I give you a bunch of personal data I don't really care about, and you let me interact on your website for free. What could possibly go wrong? How many people can tell me who that is? I know you can. Anyone else? Oh, yes. All right, good, good. Who is this? All right, who's Alexander Nix? Yes, absolute. Alexander Nix, CEO of, Cambridge Analytica CEO, Alexander Nix. And it was great seeing you put that in the, Laura had that in her talk earlier today, and I'm like, nobody knows who this is. Okay, so many people know, I know who this is. But yes, Cambridge Analytica, as Laura told us earlier today, up to not great things, takes some of that data that I don't care about and uses it to promote candidates that I might not be too crazy about. But I think this goes beyond that even. I think there's an even more critical question we need to ask. So for a while, I was working for a client who had a very, very, very large intranet, right? The internet that you use at work specifically for work. 100,000 people on this thing, massive project, and a whole lot of content and a whole lot of content creators all competing for eyeballs of employees on this massive intranet. And a natural question occurs. If the people looking at this content are by definition at work when they're looking at it, how much time should they spend looking at content, and how much time should they spend, you know, doing their job? Crickets. Nobody could answer that question. All they could tell me was, it needs to be more. I literally got a note from upper management that said, quote, make it more social. Yep, that's how we're going to get the eyeballs, by making it more social. That was how much direction we had. But I would argue this isn't just a question for intranets. I don't care what your platform is. No one should be on it 24/7. Presumably at some point they should walk their dog, take a nap, wash the dishes, right? So how much time should any user spend engaging with your platform? What would your shareholders answer to that question? When's the last time you went to a shareholder meeting and they were all, we're really worried about our users. How's their mental health? Are they doing okay? We should send them a fruit basket. No, shareholders have one question. Where's my money? I gave you money. I gave you quite a bit of money. And I gave you that money expecting a whole lot of money back. Where is it? Why are you not getting it right now? Why are you employing all these people when you could fire some of them and then give me more money? And this has consequences. Welcome to the worst graph in history. This is called the natural engagement pattern. Facebook released it in 2018. And what it describes is that as you move from allowed content, cat videos, and move into prohibited content, say misinformation and hate speech, engagement skyrockets. Now think about that for a second. If your business model is based on making advertisers happy, and advertisers are happier when engagement goes up, and engagement goes up when you have more misinformation and hate speech, what is your business model now based on? Misinformation and hate speech. I talked to someone who used to work for Google on my podcast, and she told me that part of her job was to track misinformation on Facebook. And one of the top signals that a piece of content was misinformation was the number of times it had been shared. The more times it had been shared, the more likely it was to be misinformation. Our research suggests that no matter where we draw the lines for what is allowed, as a piece of content gets close to that line, people will engage with it more on average, even when they tell us afterwards they don't like the content. Now, the only thing more infuriating than this quote is who said it. Zuck knew that shit. Regardless, in 2017, 10,000 Rohingya Muslims were killed during a military crackdown in Buddhist-majority Myanmar. Some of the survivors got together and sued Facebook. They also wrote an open letter to Facebook which said, Facebook's algorithms amplified hate speech against the Rohingya people. The firm failed to invest in moderators and fact-checkers who knew about the political situation in Myanmar. This is not a case of unintended consequences. They knew. Anybody on the ground knew exactly what would happen if hate speech got out on a major platform in this environment. The company failed to take down posts or delete accounts that incited violence against Rohingya. And when I show you one of these, you'll be shocked it wasn't taken down immediately. And remember, when Elon Musk took over Twitter, what was the very first thing he did? Fired the content moderators. The lawsuit itself states that Facebook was willing to trade the lives of the Rohingya people for better market penetration in a small country in Southeast Asia. And Facebook admitted it. They straight up said, yeah, we did that. This is one of the pieces of content that was up during that time. No, seriously, fuck engagement. So, if what we just witnessed is what it looks like when we make the web about things, what could it look like if we make it about people? And to do that, we have to visit the Siksika Nation. Siksika Nation is a part of the Blackfoot Confederacy of First Peoples located basically around Alberta, Montana area. And they came on my radar because of this guy. Anybody recognize this guy? How about now? This is Abraham Maslow of Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Now, a couple things about this. This is a pop psychology term, which is basically understood as people have 5 levels of needs. You start with things like physical safety, and then you get into things like love and belonging. And at the very tippy top, you get this idea of self-actualization, becoming a whole person. Now, there are a lot of things misunderstood about this particular dynamic. First off, it was never intended to be a period. Some designer and marketing manager came along and did that. And it was also never meant to be like leveling up in a video game. It wasn't like, oh, first you get the physiological safety, then you get to get the love. Maslow believed we were chasing all 5 of these at the same time. It's just that more people had nailed down the physiological part, a few less than that had gotten the safety, and a few less. By the time you get to the very tippy top of self-actualization, maybe 10% of any given population had actually achieved that. So Maslow has a friend, this is like in the 1930s. Maslow has a friend who is living with a SXSW and says, hey Maslow, come on out, live with us for a while, I think it'll help you out with your theory. So he does, and one of the first things he discovers is that it isn't 10% of the SXSW who are self-actualized. It's more like all of them. The white people in the village, on the other hand, the more I got to know the whites in the village, who were the worst bunch of creeps and bastards I'd ever run across in my life, the more it got paradoxical. Maslow didn't hold back. So here's the thing. The SXSW probably wouldn't use the term self-actualized. They would probably use a term more like nita patapi, which means someone who is completely developed or who has arrived. And crucially, they didn't believe you got to this point by going on some vision quest or accomplishing a whole lot of tasks or going through a bunch of suffering. No, they believed you were born that way. Now think about how many things in life that fundamental assumption affects. Parenting. I'm not going to be super strict with my kids because I don't have to make them good. They're already good. I have to make sure they don't get eaten by a bear. I maybe have to teach them how to fish, but they're basically good. I just have to get out of the way. Think about crime, right? That person didn't commit that crime because they're an evil person and need to be locked away or maybe killed. No, they're basically a good person. We need to figure out why they made that choice. Maybe there's some things they need to change, and maybe there's some things we need to change. It starts to look a lot more like restorative justice or a public health situation. But my favorite is what this does to the idea of wealth. For the Blackfoot, wealth was not measured by money and property, but by generosity. The wealthiest man in their eyes is the one who has almost nothing because he has given it all away. They would literally get together in giving circles every year and talk about who gave out what. Oh, you gave this, oh, you gave the most, yay. Think about this. If you were playing a video game, and the only way to advance in the video game wasn't to get points, but was to give them away, what would you spend most of the time in that game doing? Looking for people to give your stuff to. And as a result, Maslow had a really hard time finding poverty in the SXSW, because the second anybody was down on their luck, everybody would come swooping in, trying to make them whole. So what happens if we build the web based on the assumption that everyone is good and worth helping? Not just the people whose data we can take, not just the people who can pay us directly. Everybody is nita patapi. Let's take a look at another perspective. So fun fact, the Enlightenment wasn't just a bunch of white dudes in Europe saying, hey, you know what's awesome? Rationality. Turns out a lot of those ideas were sparked by conversations between indigenous and European intellectuals in North America. This is one of those intellectuals, a guy named Kondiaronk. He was living around the 1600s, around the Lake Huron area, and he was a Wendat strategist, brilliant human being. So brilliant that when he got to know Frontenac, who was a French lieutenant, basically in charge of Montreal at the time, Frontenac was so impressed that he would have Kondiaronk come over to his house and have all of his officers come into the house and debate Kondiaronk and lose. Kondiaronk would wipe the floor with them, all right? And this became one of the bases for the European Salon. So Kondiaronk had this critique, and this critique was more of a general indigenous critique of European living that, again, helped form the basis of the Enlightenment. And the indigenous critique of European living goes something like this. I don't understand, we, indigenous folks, we don't understand why you Europeans spend so much time and make yourselves so miserable trying to get rich. It just doesn't make sense to us. And is it because you think if you're rich, people will do what you tell them, right? You'll have a lot of power, you'll have a lot of stuff. And the reason that didn't make any sense to Kondiaronk is because where Kondiaronk is from, it doesn't matter how rich you are, nobody's going to do what you say. Nobody's going to do what you say even if you pay them. No one's going to do what you say even if you are nominally their chief. The only way someone's going to do what you say is if you convince them it's a good idea. And that's why Kondiaronk was so good at debate, because it's the only way to get shit done. So he's baffled by this, and he goes on to say, for my own part, I can find it hard to see how you could be much more miserable than you already are. What kind of human, what species of creature must Europeans be that they have to be forced to do good and only refrain from evil because of fear of punishment? So again, where Kondiaronk comes from, you do good because it's good. It boggles his mind that someone would have to be forced to do good. But he has a theory. I have spent 6 years reflecting on the state of European society, and I still can't think of a single way they act that's not inhuman. Again, Kondiaronk does not hold back. And I genuinely think this can only be the case as long as you stick to your distinctions of mine and thine. And the penny drops, right? It's this dynamic of what is mine and what is yours that's generating all of this misery. Why? In Dawn of Everything, David's Graeber and Wengrow go on to explain the whole apparatus of trying to force people to behave well would be unnecessary if France did not also maintain a contrary apparatus that encourages people to behave badly. And what might that apparatus be? Let's all say it together. Capitalism, right? Capitalism comes along and says, hey, you know what's awesome? Being rich. Seriously, people are going to do what you say. You're going to have all this cool stuff. You're going to love it. Oh, you know what, though? Don't steal anything. I get how you think that stealing stuff would make you that. I know. But if you do, we'll kill you. Oh, you know what else? Don't kill anybody, right? I can see how that you'd think that would help with just, no, don't. Oh, and you know, slavery, let me get back to you on that one. So let's look back at Facebook. These are Facebook's earnings, their stock price, from 2012 to 2022, and this is where the genocide happens. What does the stock price do? Just keeps going up. A contrary apparatus. Now, I wrote a book about bias, and as a result, I'm often asked, hey, Dave, what's your favorite bias? And I'm like, I don't actually like biases. But I can tell you which bias I like the least. And it's a bias called the just world hypothesis. And the just world hypothesis goes something like this. We live in a just world. Everything is just great. Good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people, right? It's a wonderful way to live. Why is this the worst bias? And I can tell you that this is especially prevalent in America because that is America's whole sales pitch. It does not matter who your parents are. That's some European shit. No, here, you decide your own destiny. But that's a double-sided coin. Because if your destiny turns out not so good, oh, that must be your fault. Because good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. Oh, you're sick? I guess you didn't take good care of yourself. Oh, you're poor? You must be lazy. Oh, did someone do something terrible to you? But did you kind of ask for it? Right? All these horrible, blame the victim kind of mentalities arise out of the just world hypothesis. And the just world hypothesis is doing a lot of heavy lifting, right? It's giving me back control, right? Because all I got to do to stay safe is be a good person, right? Pay my taxes, work really hard, hustle, work 80 hours a week, right? And everything's going to be okay. Everything's under my control. There's no possibility some random shareholder somewhere could decide my fate and lay off me and 1,000 of my buddies all at once. Impossible. No, that would only happen if I was a bad person. The flip side of that is, oh, that person over there, they're suffering. Not my problem. That's on them. They were bad. They did something terrible. It would be bad for me to help them. I'd be encouraging them. No. And one of the beautiful things about the just world hypothesis is it keeps us from thinking about systems. Because if the world is just all on its own, what systems could possibly exist to make it better or worse for people? And not thinking about systems is a beautiful thing. Because if we think about systems long enough, we realize they're corrupt. Then we feel obligated to do something about that. And that is scary as hell. But there are people out there who are thinking about systems. Let's talk about Gabe Weinberg. Gabe Weinberg founded DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine that quite simply does not collect any personal data whatsoever. And he gets called to testify before Congress because a whole bunch of privacy legislation is coming down the pike, and Congress in American Congress is freaking out because they're like, oh my God, privacy restrictions, it's gonna ruin business. And Gabe says, not so much. In many ways, I come to you from the future. I run a business that is already GDPR and CCPA compliant. Our privacy policy is straightforward and doesn't require a law degree to decipher. We simply do not collect or share any personal information at all. Hey, you want a really short privacy policy? Don't collect any data. It'll be like 5 sentences long. As a privately held company, our finances are private, right? No shareholders to answer to. Though I'm proud to say we've been profitable using contextual advertising. Contextual advertising, right? You search for shoes, guess what ads you get? Profitable using contextual advertising since 2014, and last year we earned substantially more than the $25 million revenue floor that subjects a company to CCPA. These laws don't even kick in lest you make at least $25 million. They blew past that. So you don't even have to be poor to be good. And we are not alone. For example, in response to GDPR, the New York Times switched from behavioral advertising to contextual advertising and reported an increase in revenue. You might actually do better being good. If Congress forced the digital advertising industry to return to its roots, it would allow companies to remain profitable or even become more profitable. Okay, that's the money he's willing to leave on the table to be a more ethical company. How about Will Reynolds? Will Reynolds runs a SEO firm called SXSW Interactive in Philadelphia, and he's made some interesting choices. The custodial staff at SER are full-time employees. Now, I don't know how it's done here in America. Most of the time, the people who clean your office are not actually employees of your office. They are employees of a third-party company who's hired to come in and clean your office and probably lots of other offices. And as a result, they don't get to use the gym like you do. They don't get health benefits, they don't get all the things. And again, talking about America here, you're smarter about that kind of thing. But all the benefits you get as an employee, they don't get. And Will took a look at that and said, you know what? The people who are cleaning this office are contributing to the success of this company, just like the people who code. Why shouldn't they get the same benefits? So he made them full-time employees, which is life-changing money here, right? They do get to use the gym. They do get a 401k. They do get the health benefits. They maybe get to send their kids to the college for the first time ever. Another thing he does is says, you know what? Maybe our salary floor, which we will have, is going to be $65,000. Why? Well, just go to their website. They spell it out. We believe everyone, regardless of role level, deserves to make a livable wage. Sound familiar? Everybody is Nita Patapi? Even if it's higher than market ranges, which is why Sears' livable wage is 31% above market ranges. Now, Will Reynolds is the last person who would call himself an anti-capitalist. And I'm no economist, but I'm pretty sure one of the core tenets of capitalism is that the market decides the value. He's saying, no, human dignity is going to decide the value, and as it happens, that's 31% higher than what the market says it is. Now, you might be saying, okay, these are CEOs. They can do whatever they want. I'm an individual contributor. What could I possibly do? Well, let's talk about an individual contributor, J.R. Miller. J.R. Miller works for Google. He goes to a Black Lives Matter rally in Oakland, comes home and says, you know what I'm going to build? The black-owned business layer for Google. And it's still there now if you ever want to try to use it yourself. Let's talk about another individual contributor. This is Sadie Redwing, and she's thinking about systems in different ways. And she is an Indigenous designer, and she was on a podcast with Matt May from Adobe, and she talked about things she thinks about design that a lot of other designers don't typically think about design. And this is thinking about the land thinking about materials, and thinking about reciprocity. So let's walk through that. Thinking about the land. So she gives the example of making a logo for a sports team. And she gives the example of the Seattle Seahawks, which is an American football team, and the Phoenix Suns, which is a basketball team. And she says, if I were asked to make a logo for a sports team, the first question I would ask is, what are the native flora and fauna? Now, how many of you have been to a design brief where native flora and fauna are one of the things that you learn about your client, right? But she's like, no, this is critically important. And in the Seattle Seahawks logo, you can see there are the blues and the greens that are indicative of the forest and the trees and the ocean that you have in Seattle. And you can see that the line drawing style is indicative of certain Native American drawing styles. All of these things are very uniquely Seattle. And then she talks about the Phoenix Suns logo, which is a basketball and a sun. And she describes this as a really wasted opportunity, right? Phoenix has these beautiful desert flowers that are unique to Phoenix. Here we have basketball, which is kind of everywhere, and the sun, which is unique to anywhere with access to Earth's sun. She also talks about material, right? So there's this concept called biomimicry, and it's this really cool thing where you take something from nature and you apply it to your own design. So one of the famous examples is these little burrs that stick to animal fur and carry the plant further and further away. And that was one of the big inspirations for Velcro. Well, it turns out indigenous folks have been onto that for a while now. And she gives the example of being asked to create, let's say, portable shelters. And design materials would be a question that would come up, and her fellow designers might be writing about carbon nanofiber and this and that, and she would raise her hand and say, what about buffalo hides? And people would be like, ew. And she would say, well, you know, buffalo are cool in the summer and warm in the winter because of the hides. My favorite of the things she thinks about that often we don't think about is reciprocity. So we usually think about the design process as being done when we ship, right? We've shipped it, yay. We might iterate on that, but basically we're done. And she says, what if that's not the last step? She gives the example of the printing press. Okay, so we're inventing the printing press, and it took like 20 sprints, but we're done. We shipped the printing press, yay, we're making books. She says, what you really should do at that point is ask the question, where did the paper for the books come from? Literally grows on trees. So maybe we're not done until we plant a few trees. Now we've completed the design process, right? There's reciprocity. And before you say, okay, that's great for a physical object like the printing press, I work in digital. What could that possibly mean? Well, as some of you may know, if the internet were a country, it would have the carbon footprint of the country we are in right now. It would have the carbon footprint of Germany. So yeah, there is definitely something we can give back when we create digital products. Now, I don't know why Sadie does what she does, or why Will was leaving to leave the money on the table that he did. But I know for me, a big question came up in 2019. In 2019, I was diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety. And I got on the therapy, I got on the meds. It's the best decision I ever made. And one of the questions we tackled in therapy is this question: am I a good person? I had been going into every single interaction with this question on my mind. And every single interaction was basically a trial. And at the end of that trial, if things went well, the jury would come back and say, yay, you're a good person. And if that interaction didn't go well, the jury would come back and say, you're a terrible person. How dare you exist? Now, we started to shift in therapy from this basically useless question, because as it turns out, it's a bad idea to outsource your self-worth. We moved from this question to a more helpful question. Am I getting closer to my values, right? And it's a perfectly reasonable question. I have values. I believe in compassion. I believe in connection and creativity. And instead of asking in that interaction, am I a good person, I can ask, in that interaction, did I arrive with compassion, right? Did I get closer to connection? And even in terms of just making decisions, right? Will this decision be more compassionate? Which choice will lead more to spirituality, right? This is a much more reasonable and frankly realistic question to ask, and a better way to move around the world. So we saw what Will is leaving to leave money on the table for. What are you willing to leave money on the table for? What are the things your company is willing to leave money on the table for? Would they be willing to work in a country that doesn't allow people to be gay? And anyone on your team who's queer would basically have to hide their identity. What are the things your shareholders are willing to leave money on the table for? Is there anything your shareholders will be willing to leave money on the table for? The shorter that list is, the more likely your company might be unethical. Let's bring it on home. We must assume that it is good to be connected to the land, to the people, and to our values. Right now, we do not. We only connect to things that will make us money. We've built a web that is indifferent to the land, indifferent to the people, and indifferent to ourselves. We must do better, and I believe we can do better. New term alert. Interdependent design. DJ Khaled has to be there anytime anything new is announced. It's in his contract. So, interdependent design is design that prioritizes connection to the land, prioritizes connection to other people, and prioritizes connection to our values. It deprioritizes connection to money. It deprioritizes connection to acquisition and to just rampant growth. And what I like about this term is that interdependence isn't something we have to reach for. We're already interdependent. We rely on each other. We rely on the trees. We rely on nature. It's as obvious as breathing, right? I breathe out, I give carbon dioxide to the trees. They breathe out, give me oxygen. It's so simple, we do it without even thinking, right? We are interdependent. All we need to do is strip away all the things that are hiding that are denying that. We've seen what happens when we ignore or fight the fact that we are interdependent with nature. We get climate crises. What if engagement were measured by the number of people helped? I can tell you this doesn't end well. Even in the kindest endings to this myth, Narcissus bursts into flame and melts out of the passion he has for this dude in the lake he can't get with. So what if the web that was reflected back to me was the real me, right? What if what followed me around the web wasn't my purchases, but my values, what I believe in? What if that's what I was being reminded of? What if the web reflected back to me was the land where I live? Fun fact, the more time people spend in nature, the smaller they make themselves in selfies. Don't know why, that just seemed relevant. What if the web reflected back to me was people I can help? A friend of mine was talking about ordering from Grubhub, one of those food delivery services, and his daughter comes up to him and says, well, while we're at it, why don't we order some food for that guy over there we know doesn't have a place to live? Yeah, why don't we? And Grubhub, why didn't you tell me about that? What kind of a web would Kandiaronk's assumptions build? What kind of a web would Siksika assumptions build? And why is it Tumblr? We don't have time to get into it right now, and I highly encourage you to find me afterward and just get me talking about Tumblr. But the shortest I can make it is this. Tumblr is the anti-Twitter. Twitter is basically stand-up. Look how smart I am. Look how funny I am. I cut you down. Look how awesome I am. Tumblr is more like improv. Hey, you made up a movie? Okay, I'll make up a poster for that movie. Oh, and I'll make up all this fanfic about the movie. Oh, and we'll convince Martin Scorsese that he really did direct Goncharov. It's great. Seriously, find me after. Look, I know this is uncertain. I can't give you like a bullet list of this is how we get to the future. I don't have that. But honestly, we kind of love uncertainty, right? How many designers in this room love it when the client comes up to you and says, oh, I figured this out last night in Figma. Here, just make this. No, tell me the parameters, tell me what you need done, tell me about the audience, let me figure it out. And developers, you love it when the client shows up with literally a printed sheet of code and says, just type this in, can you do that? No, tell me the parameters, tell me what you want to accomplish, let me figure it out. I'm going to show you this, I'm going to hope it works. And I hope it resonates with you the way it does with me. All you really need to know for this setup is that Nicolas Cage is talking to a former employee who now has their own restaurant. Ah. There we go.
What is the concept here?
We're interested in taking local ingredients native to this region and just deconstructing them, making the familiar feel foreign, thereby giving us an even greater appreciation of food as a whole.
This is the kind of cooking you like?
It's cutting edge. It's very exciting.
Exciting.
I mean, everybody loves it.
You like cooking it?
Absolutely.
Derek, what was it you always used to talk about opening? Wasn't it a pub?
Everyone loves it here. This is a huge success.
Why didn't you open your pub?
I don't know that I really wanted. I mean, it was such a long time ago.
When I fired you, I asked you what you wanted to do. You said you have a few rooms upstairs. A real English pub.
Did I say that?
Yes.
Nobody wants pubs around here. It's just a terrible investment.
What was going to be your signature dish?
Liver Scotch eggs with a honey curry mustard.
They're not real. You get that, right? None of it is real. The critics aren't real. The customers aren't real. Because this isn't real. You aren't real.
Okay.
Derek, why do you care about these people? They don't care about you. None of them. They don't even know you. Because you haven't shown them. Every day you'll wake up and there'll be less of you. You live your life for them and they don't even see you. You don't even see yourself. We don't get a lot of things to really care about.
So I'm going to give you a little homework. I want you to, after this conference is over, go home, go back to your hotel room, sit down, get a piece of paper, and just write down what you believe in. Identify your values. What are those things that when you're doing them, you are showing people the real you? What are those few things you get to care about? Once you've done that, start looking at how your work is getting you closer to those values or further away. And if it is getting you further away, what are a few steps you can do to get just a little bit closer? And finally, I want us to co-imagine the future with the people who are hurt by the present. All these forces I'm asking you to fight, misogyny, the patriarchy, capitalism, they started out as ideas in somebody's head. Somebody thought them up, the idea caught on, and made the world a worse place. But the idea that everybody's needed Patampi, that was also just an idea. Somebody thought it up, it caught on, and it made the world a better place. So I'm going to ask you, what's your idea? Now, when I first wrote this talk, I was like, yeah, what's your idea? Mic drop, done, perfect, boom. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know what, that's too small a question. And really, it just gets us the long way around back to personalization. So I'm going to ask a harder, but I think a more meaningful question. What's our idea? What's the idea we are going to come up with together? And not just the people in this room, but the people outside this room who've maybe been hurt by design, maybe even by some of our designs. Because that's the idea that's actually going to change the world. Thank you.
Thank you.